Life as a night shift nurse at the small-town hospital is filled with eerie and quiet moments, but none ever prepared me for the one night when I met Mrs. Eleanor. I am Jane, and until that night, I had deemed myself unflappable. Our hospital was of the old-fashioned kind, the kind that creaks, settles, then shares all its secrets in every nook and cranny. It was just after 2 a.m., the time when the world seems to hold its breath, waiting for the dawn. And so, I completed the round, and just checked up on the few patients we had. Then I saw her, Mrs. Eleanor, sat raised up in bed, looking out of the window kind of dazedly. An elderly lady with a kind face, I thought, looking just slightly out of place, in a dimly lit room. Due to some minor cardiac issues. Admit for observation. Not unusual. She turned toward me, her face full of a mingling of fear and relief. "Nurse," she hissed, barely a breath, "there's a man outside my window. He's been watching me." I looked at the window, and since we were 3rd floor up, it couldn't be possible for anyone to be appointed just outside of her window. I shrugged with disappointment, and decided it was simply something to do with the trick of the light or perhaps some reflecting reason, but seeing that her eyes were wide in fear, I came to the window to show her there was nothing. Dimly, I was only looked at outside our room again reflected back from the glass. Again and again consoled, but she seemed not to have comforted at all. "I saw him standing," she said, quivering, staring right at my face. I took a glance around for them, even running my eyes into the next rooms and the hallway, but there was nobody to be seen. The rest of my shift passed uneventfully, yet the words of Mrs. Eleanor hung in my mind. The next night, she again called me and said she felt like the man had returned. This time, I took my mind to perform a little investigation. I said to her that this guy does look like what, having in mind the idea that possibly she was a victim of her memories. It was a short description, medium height, in colors of black, with some piercing and kind of disturbing eyes that almost made passers-by's hair stand up. I could not help the curiosity and concern. So I went in the security office and asked them to make out the footage about her window. What we found had me held in chills. On the cameras, there was a figure, more or less a man. He had put on dark clothes and was only outside the hospital, looking up to Mrs. Eleanor's window. The angle and distance made it impossible to see his face, but the shadow told me indescribably that there is somebody. "We'll have to tick up the security post." I never saw the man again, nor, according to Mrs. Eleanor, did she. But the whole incident gave me an impression. Someone had been there, ghosting around in the shadows, to watch an old woman through her hospital window. It reminded me that the very night is a hodiousome of things which the day will never bring forth, and that at times, the fears whispered in the dark are very real indeed.
It was just another hot July evening, pretty ordinary for Phoenix, Arizona, where even at night the heat is at a devastating high. It just becomes worse and worse, wrapped in such a thick woolen cover pulled out of the heavens and thrown over the city. My name is Damian Anderson, and it so happened that then, in one night, I lived in an apartment in one part of the town. The place appeared as if it had been put up during the 50s and not renovated or taken care of ever since. The place actually had some sort of charm about it, at least at night, with the city rushing in the distance, dimly far-off stars. I had just walked in from till close at the diner down the way. Tired, I dropped my shoes by the door, poured myself a glass of water, and flopped onto the sofa next to my dog, Buster, a great company but way too enthusiastic one, that is, since he was a shepherd mix. The silence was communicative. The silence of the apartment was somewhat reassuring in the noisy, crazy environment in the diner. About midnight or so, after constant scrolling of meaningless stuff on my touchscreen, it was time to sack. Buster, who generally sleeps at the head of the bed, up at the foot, was quite hyper tonight. He was pacing to and fro, whining ever so softly in an unusual way. I brushed it off as the little doggy was just being energetically hyper, and a good night's rest would do us both good. I was wrong. Then sometime past 3 a.m. in the morning, I was jolted from sleep by Buster growling. Not that many people sound he does when playing or excited, but low and very mean, almost threatened, that almost sent a shiver of dread down my spine, as much as it sounded unlike Buster. My heart thundered as I bolted upright in bed, trying to make my pupils of the eyes adjust to the engulfing darkness. The glow of the streetlights outside barely illuminated the room, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. The growling Buster seemed now to move on to a real bark. He was standing stiff as a rod at the bedroom door and clearly very alert. I flicked one-handedly at the bedside lamp, and then my hand reached onto my phone, flicking the torch on, holding it up to peer around the room. And then that's when there was a scratching that I almost didn't hear at the front door to my apartment. It was quiet, too rhythmic, like it might be if the wood was just too alive, and something or someone were secretly practicing running their nails unobtrusively over it. There were 1,001 possible explanations for what I had heard. The wind perhaps had simply turned a branch from that tree out my window. Such an explanation, however, was not going to sit well because of the adrenaline involved. Buster and I crept closer to the door, and now, if it wasn't just my imagination, that scratching and snuffling sound on the other side seemed to be getting louder. My heart thudded loudly, in fact, so loudly I had been sure whatever was on the other side of it had been picking up the sound, but as we got closer, the scratching sound stopped in its place, replaced by a silence so heavy I couldn't breathe for a second. For a moment my hand hesitated, left hanging in midair by the doorknob, and the hackles on Buster rose, a warning that all was not well at the other end of the door. I began to inhale deeply once again, my nervous self composing and psyching myself up to face whatever was on the other side. I unlocked the door and swung it open, ready for the worst. Very oddly, there wasn't anyone there. The hallway outside my apartment stretched forth, the few weak bulbs above me flickering on and off from time to time in a very strange manner. It seemed to me that the whole world was holding its breath on the other side of my door. I crept out, Buster doing the same behind me, for all the world like a large, overgrown rabbit, his nose very nearly touching the ground in his attempts to pick up the scent of just what had caused the disturbance. I had stepped farther down the corridor, took a look into the dark, half expecting something or somebody was lurking there. But no, just the regular kind of quiet reigning in an apartment complex at night seemed to reassure me. Felt like a fool, but turned back towards the apartment ready to blow it off as my imagination or something that wildlife in the city had found its way a bit too close to home. I had just turned around to close the door when Buster let out a warning bark, and I turned his way as his gaze was focused past me down the hall. I turned my own attention down the corridor and forgot to breathe for a moment. Far down at the end, through the failing light, there was something, not moving, nothing so nebulous and shapeless, but certainly a human silhouette. The thought had hardly crossed my mind before the figure turned and disappeared into the stairwell, leaving me to wonder if I had seen anything at all. Need I say, that was all that was needed to make me even more jittery than I was already. I double-checked on all my door and window locks and headed back to bed, but sleep was evidently far from the furthest thing from my mind. The events of the night were so rude, stirring my little world from its peace, that a feeling of unease would still just stick like the heat of the Phoenix night. I immediately worked out whether they had heard or noticed anything strange the previous evening, and all of them answered at once, no, some of them casting inquisitive glances, which made me feel like the new guy in town, not yet adjusted to the local idiosyncrasies. I was no firm skeptic, but, against my will, insisted I on unpleasant thoughts, for it not to have been something more than simply a play of light or product of one's imagination. There was, indeed, something outside, something or somebody of that I was certain in my heart, so that the peace of that sweltering July evening seemed a treachery, a mere lull before the storm.
My name is Callie, and this is a story I thought I would never actually relate, mostly because it's sort of on the prissy side of borderline nutty sounding. Still, every little detail holds an etch inside my memory, playing like a reminder of an encounter on the outside tracks of my hometown, Barrow Creek, Kentucky, located in the center of the state. It was late autumn 2019, the leaves a riot of color against the crisp, clear skies. I took a walk down to the bank of Barrow Creek, a meandering stream just outside of town. After a few paces past the tree, and the stream flowed thick and dark to the woods. I had heard whispers of the old bridge, the story of how it was hidden away deep into the woods, a structure from the past old age, reclaimed by nature and forgotten, locals whispering strange stories amid goings-on near it, but I always scoffed, thinking it was nothing but tall tales. That day, curiosity got the better of me. It seemed like the first stretch of that way must have undergone many feet, but when I delved inside the woods, the pathway got the dim and overgrown look. An uncanny hush filled the air in the woods that is the norm with the absence of something starkly missing. The air turned cold, an eeriness that lay deeper than the skin, despite the warmth of an autumn afternoon. After something like an eternity, I stumbled upon a bridge. Formerly a towering thing, the once solid iron frame was neither now rusted, and in some cases, twisted, with the planks. The planks had become rotten and treacherous, vines and moss clung to it, as if trying to drag it down into the creek below. It was a view both sad and beautiful, a monument to nature, always ready to take back man's follies. I was a little stunned, a shade too daring to be afraid, so impelled equally by the wonderful sight as by the thrilling sense, perhaps, that I would muster in not looking down at the murky waters. The wood groaned and creaked, swatting off with each step under my weight. Halfway across, transfixed, I paused to see the sight of the creeks tumble over the rocks, water this time a silver ribbon in the fading light. And then I heard it, the laughter of a child, as clear and close as if he were almost beside me. I spun, my heart pounding, but there was nobody there. It came again, the laughter, from that other side of the bridge, then, in a voice from that other side, as light as thistledown, "Come play with me." And then the panic set in. I was alone, in the depths of night, and the voice this time did not seem an echo or an accidental trick of the wind. It was real as my dreams, about to die once again. I wanted to run, but my legs did not move, as though I was pinned to the rotten planks of this bridge. The laughter grew louder and with force, and then I saw her, a little girl no more than 7, stood some distance away from the end of the bridge from whence I had come. She wore a dress that might have been white a long time ago, now stained and torn, her hair a riot of curls around the face that was too pale, eyes too dark. "I want you to play with me," said she. And as she spoke she jumped to the end of the bridge, and down, down, down went the planks till she was hanging just over the middle of the stream. I found my voice, if nothing louder than a whisper, "Who are you? Where are your parents?" She stopped, looked towards me as she always does, her head inclined as is the norm. A smile, once perhaps really beautiful, even kind, played about her lips, though the expression was tinged with sadness. "I merely seek a friend, it's been so long since one has come to play," she said, once cheerful, though a longing, a somewhat melancholic note, tugged at yearning chords within me, much as fear tried to. All of the logical parts of my brain tugged at the asylum that was sanity itself. Some mental asylum in the very remnant logical part of my brain shouted at me to run off the bridge and never look back. But another part, maybe the part that still remembered a little bit what it was like to be lonely and misunderstood, left me in place. I finally managed to force out. I have to go back." The sadness deepened in her eyes, and she nodded, moving aside, letting me pass. With a scurry, I made my way past her. A chill, icy air around her that I had never felt before attacked me. I raced ahead until I burst out of the woods and into the receding daylight. Looking back, the path seemed empty, the bridge and the little girl had disappeared. And never did I come back to that forgotten bridge of Barrow Creek, and never up to now have I spoken about that horrible experience. Her forlorn look seems to be haunting me, the memory that constantly haunts. Some nights, I dream about her waiting for a friend that never appeared on the bridge. It was only months later that I learned, in fact, nearly 50 years gone by already, a bridge, and it was dragging a little girl under, they say, had gone missing in the same area, just near its then overgrown remains, never to be found again. Her fate was a mystery that soon dimmed in the collective memory, like so many of the town's unresolved crimes. Now, I wonder if she's still there, caught in a moment for all time, never leaving that spot on the bridge. And part of me wishes that I had not left, that I had taken her hand and played with her, if only to give her some semblance of companionship she seeks so desperately.